Good morning, Commonwealth. Today is Tuesday, November 19th. I was just looking and jumping ahead. We're a week away from our Thanksgiving holidays. We are happy to have you joining us for the School Curriculum Assessment and Accountability Council, otherwise known as SCAAC. We are here today with some members, and in our group, we have one new member. And I'm just seeing Frank Hall is new. And Mr. Hall, as a new member, I want to review the goals of SCAAC. SCAAC is ultimately set up to study, review, and make recommendations concerning Kentucky's system of setting academic standards, assessing learning, identifying academic competencies and deficiencies of individual students, holding schools accountable for that learning, and overall assisting schools to improve their performance. So that is our charge. We also advise the Kentucky Board of Education and Legislative Research Commission on issues related to the development and implementation of statewide assessment and accountability programs, recognition of high-performing schools or sanctions, and assistance for schools to improve the performance under a variety of KRSs. So we are pleased to have you join us. And as always, for the members who have been on here before, it's always good to remind ourselves of our purpose. At the end of the day, we're here to make sure that the students of the Commonwealth succeed academically. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa Chandler, who keeps us all organized, to do our roll call.
Thanks, Janabeth. And before I call roll, I'd like to provide some information for members about conducting meetings in a virtual setting. So this meeting must comply with the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. The public may view this meeting via the link that was provided on the public agenda, which is posted on the KDE website. And SCAAC members must ensure that their video is streaming and they can be seen throughout the duration of the meeting. Additionally, all of our discussions must be broadcast to the public. So each time you do speak, please unmute your mic, state your name, and then take a short pause. This will just give our software time to recognize you. For agenda items that require a formal vote, which we'll have some of those today, we'll conduct a roll call to record the vote of each member. If you would, please silence or turn off any other electronic devices that could cause disruption to the sound feed. And minutes will be taken and shared with the general public on the KDE website when those are available. So now I'll go ahead and call roll. Members, when I call your name, please make sure that your camera and mic are on, state your full name, and then indicate you are present. We will need 9 members for a quorum. Artavia Acklin.
Oops, Artavia Acklin present. Sorry.
Thank you. That's okay. Heather Aldridge.
Heather Aldridge, present.
Deborah Atherton.
Deborah Atherton, present.
Carrie Ballinger.
Carrie Ballinger, present.
Houston Barber. Renee Boss. Martha Emmons.
Martha Emmons, present.
Chuck Fletcher.
Chuck Fletcher, present.
Janabeth Francis.
Janabeth Francis, present.
Frank Hall.
Frank Hall, present.
Leslie Jeffries.
Leslie Jeffries, present.
Brenda McGowan.
Brenda McGowan, present.
Jason Reeves. Allison Tammy. Josh Trosper.
Josh Trosper, present.
And Alan Young. Okay, we do have a quorum today. And so I'm going to move on, Janabeth, if it's okay. At this time, we're going to go ahead and do the election for the new School Curriculum Assessment and Accountability Council chair. We gathered nominations prior to today's meeting via email, and Janabeth Francis has been nominated for the chair of SCAAC. Given there's only one name on the slate, do I have a motion to approve that slate and elect Janabeth Francis as the chair of SCAAC?
I'll make that motion. Heather Aldridge.
Heather. All right. And do we have a second?
Second, Chuck Fletcher.
Okay, so election of chair requires a roll call vote. So when I call your name, please indicate aye or yes if you agree, and nay or no if you disagree. Artavia Acklin,
Yes.
Heather Aldridge,
Yes.
Deborah Atherton,
Yes.
Carrie Ballinger,
Yes.
Houston Barber, Renee Boss, Martha Emmons,
Yes.
Chuck Fletcher,
Yes.
Frank Hall,
Yes.
Leslie Jeffries,
Yes.
Brenda McGowan,
Yes.
Jason Reeves, Allison Tammy, Josh Trosper,
Yes.
Alan Young, Janabeth Francis.
Yes, and I said yes. I was on the other, but somehow my computer is not showing me the pictures. So I switched to my cell phone. So I've heard everything, but somehow my computer's not showing everything.
Gotcha,
Sorry
no
about that.
problem. I've got you marked for attendance and for that vote. Thank you so much. So
Thank you.
Janabeth Francis has been elected chair. Congratulations, Chair Francis. If it's okay at this time, I'm going to pass the torch to you, and I will let you proceed with the nominations and election for the vice chair.
Okay, and thank you, Melissa, and thank you, council. I will proceed along, and we need nominations are now in order for the office of the vice chair of SCAAC. Is there a nomination? I would nominate Heather Aldridge. Are there any further nominations?
Move that the nominations cease. Chuck Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Given there is only one name for the slate, is there a motion to approve the slate and elect Heather Aldridge as vice chair of SCAAC?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second. Chuck Fletcher.
Thank you. Okay, Melissa, for our vote.
Thank you. Artavia Acklin,
Yes.
Heather Aldridge,
Yes.
Deborah Atherton,
Yes.
Carrie Ballinger,
Yes.
Houston Barber, Renee Boss, Martha Emmons,
Yes.
Chuck Fletcher,
Yes.
Janabeth Francis,
Yes.
Frank Hall,
Yes.
Leslie Jeffries,
Yes.
Brenda McGowan,
Yes.
Jason Reeves, Allison Tammy, Josh Trosper,
Yes.
and Alan Young.
Yes.
Okay. Congratulations, Heather.
Okay, we have one more big motion to make this morning, and that is to review and approve the minutes from our September 17th meeting. These were sent to you in the SCAAC shared drive. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from September 17th.
Madam Chair, Chuck Fletcher makes a motion.
Thank you. We have a motion from Chuck Fletcher. Is there a second?
Artavia Acklin, second.
Thank you.
And
Artavia?
for this one, we could just do raise hand. We don't have to do the roll call vote, but we do have to vote on these. So we could just raise hands.
Thank you, Melissa. All in favor, raise your hand. Got a couple online raising their hands as well. Thank you. All opposed? Motion carried. And I know the commissioner is hoping to join us, but I'm not seeing him on the member list.
Yeah, I got an update from him just a few days ago, and it looks like he was double booked. And so he was going to try to jump on, but it didn't look like he was going to make it for today.
Okay, we will keep an eye out for him. If he jumps in, we will pause what we're doing and let him bring us a little greetings.
Okay.
And we're going to move right on into one of our first topics for today, and that is the topic of chronic absenteeism. Florence Chang is here from the department, And we're going to give some input into ways KDE might keep working on making sure our students come to school so they are ready to learn. Florence?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. My name is Florence Chang, and I work in the Division of Student Success at KDE, and my contact will be at the end of this, at the slide deck. So you please feel free to reach out for questions or anything. What you'll get today is just a taste of what our division is doing as we are working with districts and schools and our regional co-ops on a pressing issue that has been hitting not only us locally in Kentucky, but nationally and even internationally, which is chronic absenteeism. So you'll see a little bit of data, you'll see a little bit of information around some of the strategies that we are working with. And it's perfectly designed today, the agenda, because so many of the following topics are very much related to what we're seeing with attendance, and it will impact that. So just to level set, here's the guiding question for today. Just be thinking about messaging and other strategies that we might be thinking we need to add into our repertoire of information that you'll see today. But just to level set in terms of the definition, chronic absenteeism is not the same as truancy. So if you're familiar with truancy, truancy is based only on unexcused absences. Chronic absenteeism is defined as anybody that misses at least 10% of school after they've been enrolled at least 10 days. So this counts excused and unexcused. In terms of data, these are just maps of pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, with the darker blue indicating higher levels of chronic absenteeism. What you'll see at the bottom with the state average is pre-pandemic, we were about 1 out of 6 students were chronically absent. That's almost doubled to 1 out of 3. So, and you'll see that this has significantly impacted the entire state now. So before we did see a higher association with attendance in our eastern region of Kentucky, and now it's the entire state, with parts of eastern Kentucky reaching now above 50% chronically absent. So this is something that is pervasive and is hitting a lot of our schools and districts. This might be a particularly interesting slide for this group because this is the data broken down by grade. And at the bottom, you'll see kindergarten through 12th grade. The dark blue line is where attendance and chronic absenteeism was before the pandemic. So you'll see kindergarten, for example, was 16% chronically absent before the pandemic. And then the green line is signifying after the pandemic. And I should note the green is 22-23 data. We do have 23-24 data coming out soon, and that is similar to 22-23. It has slightly improved, but it is very similar. So the gist of this slide, though, is seeing that our youngest students have almost doubled in chronic absenteeism. So though every single grade increased in chronic absenteeism, the kindergarten, first, second grade, you'll see those percentages in red. That's the percent increase. That's where we're seeing our largest changes. And this is something very concerning at the national level. This is happening as well. And the conversation is around attendance habits. Research shows are set pretty early. So once you're chronically absent in 1 year, you're more likely to be chronically absent the next year. And when we think about those foundational skills and the social skills, emotional skills, and learning skills, all of those foundational pieces at kindergarten, first, second, those primary grades are so essential. And so seeing that is contextual data to understand what are things that we need to be thinking about as we're working on our larger assessment and accountability system. It's not only different by grade, it's also different by student groups. So what the pandemic told us is not any student group was immune from the effects. So it goes all the way from, on the left side, you see gifted and talented, all the way to our homeless populations, and then everything in between. What we see from blue to green is that jump again in chronic absenteeism. So our homeless students are now almost 50% are chronically absent. And so these are very significant numbers, and absolutely something that is hitting across all groups, including our racial groups, which I did not put on the slide, but this is also hitting across our different racial groups. So contributing factors, there's so many contributing factors to why chronic absenteeism has increased since the pandemic. It is not just one thing. This is something that comes out of Attendance Works, which is a national group that works with attendance. And as we have talked to districts, staff, and students, they echo these same contributing factors. So it ranges from everything from barriers, that something outside the school that is keeping kids from coming to school. These are kids maybe with transportation challenges or chronic health conditions, family responsibilities. If there's an economic reason, kids may be needing to work to help support families. So a myriad of reasons. And then aversion is one that our kids actually speak a lot to. When we talk to kids, they speak to the idea of really a lot of anxiety that has increased since the pandemic. And the CDC has found that as well, that anxiety, if you can imagine 18 months of isolation and then going into a large school with lots of people again, there was anxiety associated with that. So our schools are working with mental health professionals more than ever and community to address that. Disengagement is another reason. And again, our kids speak to this one as well. When we talk to them, they talk about things like, well, over the pandemic, we moved to online learning. We got used to that. And when we came back to school, the instructional delivery, a lot of times that stayed. So online assignments, virtual Google Classroom, things like that, which were benefits in the pandemic, could, as our students are saying, could lead to kids thinking, well, I can just do this at home. And so there may be less incentive to be there in person. So that led to some of those habits that were formed during the pandemic. And then misconceptions, which has always been an issue. It's just this idea that when you talk to parents, they tend to, caregivers, they underestimate the importance of attendance, thinking a couple of days doesn't really matter here and there, or they underestimate the number of days their kids have actually been absent. If you talk to them, they sometimes will just remember a couple of days and they don't remember. So the underestimation can be as much as 50%. So, but research is showing 2 days a month, just 2 days a month is what impacts attendance, 2 days absence. So, so that misconception is something that has continued through the pandemic. So what I'm going to show you next is thinking about some of the strategies. And so I would love to hear at the end of this, like your all's feedback about what we can do to enhance kind of our work around any of these areas, or if we're missing anything. But we do think of it in a tiered approach, just similar to the MTSS model, where we are creating that foundation of belonging and connectedness at tier 1. And then as we move up to tier 2 and 3, thinking more about how do we remove barriers for kids who are showing attendance problems, those interventions and enrichments that are needed for extreme cases of chronic absenteeism. I'm going to speak more to tier 1 because I think it's more relevant to this group. But again, if you come from a system that's interested in more of the longer 2-3 hour training that we do that goes into tier 2 and 3, please do reach out to me after this. So it really starts with that sense of belonging and safety and connection. We know that is the foundation of learning, and it's the condition that sets up learning. And I just said anxiety and that disconnection from school was kind of a side effect of the pandemic. And so reconnecting with kids by having that supportive culture and creating those passion-based, interest-based groups and extracurricular activities is so important. And it was interesting, we've talked about this topic throughout this semester, and our teacher advisory council particularly honed in on number 3, the educator well-being, because the subsequent work and the subsequent slides that you're going to see all involve adults. This is all adult setting, helping with the learning conditions. And if our educators are struggling because there's a shortage at the school or with working conditions from having to do more class coverage, is what they were sharing with us in a different advisory, then obviously it impacts whether they can even implement some of the following strategies. So I love that we have kind of the educator recruitment retention folks here that will follow, because I think that's a large conversation that needs to happen. So as you're thinking about sense of belonging and connection, it's also that connection with the learning. So it's not just the connection in terms of emotional and social connections with peers and adults, but we know that relevant, meaningful learning is at the core of engagement. And attendance and engagement don't go, they are related, they are not equal. So even kids who come to school, sometimes they say they have trouble staying engaged. There's just a lot of distractions. And so meaningful and relevant learning is a core strategy in terms of thinking about how do we get kids to want to be in school. And so we had a director of people personnel put it perfectly. He said, from Clark County, he said, we need kids to feel missed, that sense of belonging. So who missed me when I wasn't here? We need kids to feel like they missed out on something. So those two misses, like somebody missed me and I missed out on something. And this, what did you miss out on? You missed out on something exciting happening within the learning experience. And so as we think about our new accountability and assessment model, this is a piece that is core to that, is creating those relevant experiences. They could be related to things like project-based learning, hands-on, cooperative learning, and obviously cooperative learning is impacted when students aren't there. And our kids tell us that, like, I don't get as much cooperative learning or group work or parent share when we have kids that aren't here. And so attendance goes hand in hand with some of these strategies. And then obviously the rest of it, the culturally sustaining pedagogy, where they feel that connection with the material and see themselves in the material, having that frequent feedback and authentic assessments. Again, seeing the why to why they're learning and how do I improve, and creating that agency. So those are all essential pieces to addressing chronic absenteeism. And so what we try to tell our districts is it's not just about telling kids come to school or making adult connections with kids and a trusted adult. Those are important, but creating those the instructional climate and the learning climate is equally, if not more important, for attendance. And the last couple slides I'll just address. These are more larger conversations. So when we do our trainings, addressing external barriers, these are things related to some of the earlier reasons I talked about with chronic absenteeism, related to, like, if you have a health condition or transportation challenges. Laundry is a challenge sometimes for some families or homeless students, and access to nutritional food. So all of these are huge domains of work that involve community partners. And so we do work with our schools and districts to kind of brainstorm what are some things you can do to enhance those community partnerships, and try to get families as well as part of the improvement process. And then lastly, but really this is the beginning of much of the work that we've been doing, is around communication. As I said earlier, there are misconceptions. Families and students have misconceptions about how much school they can miss before it impacts learning. So just creating that awareness has been a core strategy of KDE. And so you'll see in the following slide that we've been working with our communications office. They've really led the charge in terms of having messaging from the commissioner all the way to like billboards, all the way to radio ads and translated ads for our Spanish families, speaking families. So just creating that awareness that we missed you in school. So the core being we as educators missing the kids. And so you'll see that campaign has been central and started at the beginning of this summer. We also work with our school districts and leaders about how they can engage and talk to families about attendance and creating that system where it's not focused on the truancy aspects or the legal aspects of, hey, you're in trouble, kid, you're not in school, but really developing communication strategies around how to talk to families about attendance. And so one example we have of that is when you make a phone call or a text or a letter that and you want to reference your child being absent, sometimes a generic sentence like, we miss Johnny in school, and when he's absent this many days, it does impact learning. That's okay, and that's a not a bad way to communicate. But what we're seeing is even more specificity can help really make the point. So, hey, we missed Johnny in school this week, and hey, we were doing science fair projects this week, and he had an awesome project, and we really missed his presentation. So something really specific to what was actually happening in that child's experience in their classroom. That is something that is shown to be more effective in really personalizing that conversation with the parents. So as our educators, again, our teachers picked up on this when we're asking them to do that one more conversation with families. That is something that takes time. It takes bandwidth to be able to do. And with schools that are struggling with many, many kids being chronically absent, it can be hard to find the adults that have the bandwidth to do all the phone calls. So we try to give strategies on how to address that. But this is something I would love to hear from this group more about. So I'll wrap up with just saying our campaign for the mid-semester is about to launch in January. So again, you'll see our chronic absenteeism webpage has many of those resources that are going to be disseminated again, and then our ads. So would love to hear if you all have any feedback on that. But I will just open it up now for questions. Do you have any ideas or thoughts after seeing the data of things that we should be aware of or things that you're experiencing in your role?
Florence, thank you so much. I want to jump in and say that the chart where you showed the attendance from kindergarten through grade 12 was eye-opening. And I wonder if KDE could help create those for every district, because I think that view of attendance is very powerful to see that the change is impacting our youngest grades. And on that note, I just made a note locally to talk to our folks who do kindergarten readiness. And that's a community-wide effort in greater Davis County, but I would assume it's an effort across the state. In a lot of places, we need to start adding this notion of attending school and being present as a key component. Alan, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, let me get my mic turned on. Dr. Chang, thank you for this eye-opening and very thorough, and yet on the other hand, cogent and succinct presentation, because I think it's easy for people to wrap their heads around what's happening. You put it up here perfectly. I've got a couple of things that I at least wanted to weigh in on. And first of all, I want to acknowledge that I think some of the things that have been done in terms of like reimagining assessment and accountability, the United We Learn stuff, the fact that the Kentucky Board of Education now has a portrait of a learner, are all things that I think have some real possibility of affecting that tier one kind of concern that you described in both the environments, the relationships and so forth that we build, and the experiences that we should offer, because those are a much more learner-centered, personalized experience, which also, I believe, put the educator back in charge of being able to not just be a curriculum implementer, but rather I need to design the learning experiences and environments that are going to engage kids to have them want to be there. And so I feel good about that. But I do think that one of the things that we don't have enumerated maybe clearly enough are the systemic barriers and or things we could create systemically to encourage more attendance with regard to the learner-centered aspects. So for example, many of the schools and populations that may be experiencing the most concerning attendance rate challenges, although it's across the population to be sure, but are ones in which they may be in schools that have been deemed as not thriving or not doing well or failing. And the kinds of things systemically those schools are asked to do because they're measured mostly on test scores actually are counter to creating these warm, inviting, relationship forward, well-being environments and these rich, personalized, experiential, exciting things to learn about that include how kids do that. So I think we got to be clear on that. And I think that I know, at least in Jefferson County, the department ends up sharing both things to our district. On the one hand, we have these things that we've been about in Jefferson County, and we are so glad that we're right on the same page with regard to the learner-centered parts. We have success skills. They're pretty much like the portrait of a learner. We know 50 other counties have all that. That's great. But then we have schools and decisions that are made district-wide or for particular schools, like our schools that have been facing accountability challenges, and they're actually having systemic challenges because they're having to try to serve both and to try to be able to say, well, we're going to do all these things to help make sure everybody's on the same page at the same time in this curriculum, which actually takes away student voice and choice and agency and interest. And so we're kind of systemically working against ourselves sometimes, I think. And I think it's really important for all of us on the local level and on the state level to kind of come clean about the systemic barriers that may be happening when we're asking people to do things that might go against engagement of kids in the tier 1 struggles. And on the other hand, needing more actual help on the support for systems change. So there can be good systems changes too. We need to make sure all this stuff counts to be able, when kids are creating things and wanting to have ways that they show off their work and that they were included, and how that can bring the parents in to be more involved in all that. So I just think that I would like to see a little bit more on this, just being that this is not just all happening to us, but we have some things internally that might be reinforcing some of the things systemically, as well as we have some of the solutions that might also be able to help us systemically.
Yeah, I just want to say I really appreciate that. And just to echo both the comments related to the kindergarten data and what you just said, Alan, that we do talk to our districts about the importance of engaging voice and thinking about student voice. We have protocols for gathering student voice, looking at educator voice with the working conditions survey, and just how to elevate that for districts to really use that data to drive improvement and to have a more balanced system. So I really appreciate having that voice piece that you just brought up, and I'm hoping to hear that again as you all talk about the later topic related to United We Learn, just how do we elevate that voice? Because like you said, sometimes it can be imbalanced. It becomes more about the test, and that our people that are closest to schools, which are our kids and our teachers, that's not what they're using, for improvement. They speak more to the experiential aspects of school. So I really appreciate that. So I just wanted to echo that.
And if I could say just one more little 5-second thing, because I was going to respond to Janabeth's comment about kindergarten readiness. And obviously, there are things we have to do to get kids ready for kindergarten. But I heard, I think maybe it was like Young's Hour or somebody that was pretty notable say, why aren't we, instead of just getting kids ready for kindergarten, why don't we think of kindergarten readiness of getting kindergartens ready for kids? So that for me is about that engagement piece again. What are we doing to make sure that they really want to be there and feel that every single day? So I just throw that out.
Okay, Josh, you had your hand up?
Yes, I was just wanting to echo what Alan was saying about, especially in a lot of districts where that aren't performing, the stigma is that attendance is only tied to test scores and money. I mean, that we hear that a lot in the eastern part of the state. You'll see it in comment sections all over. But I do think that stresses the importance of the positive campaign. And I don't know what the KDE blitz is as far as billboards and newspapers and things, but I just can't stress the importance of the positive aspect when so many tie it to either test scores or money.
And Debbie, you had a comment.
Thank you. I just wanted to give you a couple of comments that just came to mind as I was going through, and am working in the schools now. I'm retired and back, but first is that transportation is such an issue, and with the buses, and we're not running these routes today, and almost every day there's that, and I don't know that there's anything we can do about it, but it continues to be a problem. Because kids say I can't get here. So when the bus didn't run, and I'm in Bullitt County. So and the second comment is about the culture and how important that culture is that helps kids belong, engaged, all things, anything a school can do that makes them belong, because most of them are there to see each other first off, and then what's going on in the learning. So I think that's really important. And I wonder, I'll throw this out, have virtual academies helped with kids who are chronically, has that made a difference? And then the last one is really pretty basic, but if you're always listening to your students, I know that I'm in high school and I hear all the time, I'm not missing on Tuesday because it's Chicken Patty Tuesday. So as funny as that is, if you listen to what they want and pay attention, they really do come to school for food. And you'll hear, and especially boys, oh, I'm not missing on Tuesday because that's Chicken Patty Tuesday. So that's it. Just a few thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Chuck, do you have a couple comments?
Okay, let me get on mute. Okay. Yes, I do. First of all, I do like what you said about 3 words that stuck to me, and that was social, emotional, and learning skills. And I think that when I see so many students today, they're missing those characteristics. And I just love to hear more of what school districts are doing to hit those 3 areas to help those students that have those problems from home and that come to school and trying to survive at school as well as survive with the problems at home. So I just want to make that known.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I just had a couple comments. First, I do appreciate the chart that was provided showing the increase in chronic absenteeism in our kindergarten and first grade students. I'm the superintendent of Rockcastle County Schools, and we have placed great emphasis on chronic absenteeism, but we have focused on middle school and high school primarily. So that chart was very beneficial to me. I think it is very important. I'm going to echo what Josh said, is we have to maintain the positive message. Nothing turns families off quicker than to think that they're being attacked or to think that they're being criticized, we have to be willing just to talk with families and break down barriers. And that goes with focusing on, we're here as your support system. What can we do to help you? So that's the avenue that we have taken. Our attendance rate is up over a percentage point from this point last year. And we've actually hired some individuals in our district that are focusing on students that are missing school or that are chronically absent. They're going in the home. They're going on home visits. They're going to tell kids, hey, we miss you. Come on back to school. What's going on? Why are you not at school? And that is their sole job, is to go to make sure that kids realize that when they're not at school, that they certainly are being missed. The other comment that I had is, it's difficult because there's not a lot that we can do for those elementary students when they're missing school, because they are so dependent on the parents. So that's just a little bit of a different approach than when you're dealing with middle school and high school that are just a tad bit more independent. Also, it's important to talk to your kids and find out what it is that drives them coming to school. I've been in 4 high school classrooms over the last month, and I've just gone and sat down and talked to our students and said, tell me why you're not coming to school. What is it? What could we do different at Rockcastle County High School that would entice you to come to school? And oftentimes they do mention Orange Chicken Day. They're not missing school on Orange Chicken Day. They're going to be here. So that is valid. One girl, we've made some changes. Something that was shared to me is the locks in the girls' bathrooms don't always work well, and we don't want to come to school because if we have to go to the bathroom, we're embarrassed. So, you cannot forget that there's minor things that also trigger students to have anxiety that we often overlook. So I think you always have to go back to talk to your kids. That's the most important thing in my perspective.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Frank, you have your hand up?
Yes, I think the numbers and the statistic that was provided, I think that's great. I think that was more like a public announcement, getting people who's in the communities where a lot of the kids are not coming up, showing up to school and being absent over periods of time. I think the people that's in the community also can have an impact by talking. If there's a way that they can understand who are the kids in the community that are missed, or if there's a sense, I went through the same thing when I was in school, in the public school system, where I got straight A's, I did great, and then all of a sudden I lost interest, but I was more attentive, wanted to see what was going on more in the community. I didn't go to, my mother didn't even know I wasn't going to school. And I would get my report card. She didn't know. But it was 7 of us in the household. So to reach out to the parents, to constantly remind that your kid hadn't been to school, or get other people that's in the community that has some type of influence or impact, they can go out and talk to those, to the family and talk to the kids, and they respond to people who they can identify with. And another thing was that's very true. If a kid know that they're being missed, they would show up just because they know they're being missed, because outside of that, they don't feel important. Who's missing, or if they don't go, so what, So they're not being missed, and no one is in their ear about you need to be in school. And I know from my time, we went from the extended family more to the nuclear family, which you don't have a lot of people in the community that's not involved in the overall education or the well-being of families outside of their own. So to get people more engaged, I don't know whether it's incentivizing them or somehow to stay involved and let them know that this is a big problem based on the numbers that was showed and the statistics that was that we seen, that I seen. It's just, that's alarming, and it's scary. Thank you.
Florence, I hope we've given you a lot of insight. This was a wonderful discussion committee. I think it's one of those problems that everyone in the Commonwealth needs to work towards, no matter what group. And so, Florence, any closing words?
So just thank you all so much for having me today. And I did put the contact information up here for our team if you need to reach out to us. And what I'll end with was just, I think the conversation just reiterates to me that increasing attendance in school is not just about telling kids come to school. It's not just attendance. So the subsequent conversations around educator well-being, creating those vibrant learning experiences, and having a meaningful assessment system, all of those are strategies that will hit on engagement and attendance and belonging. And so it's not just about that communication of attendance. And we are working on it, on communication, but I now see like the larger conversation and the systemic conversation around all the work that KDE and this group is doing is going to help increase student engagement and attendance. So just appreciate your all's comment. I took a lot of notes that I'll bring back to our larger team. So thank you.
Thank you. We're now going to move on, and as Florence said, to a conversation that I think is very connected and related. We're going to hear a little bit about teacher recruitment and retention. Meredith Brewer, Veda Stewart, and Ellie Gilbert are here to join us. And as you hear their presentation, really focus on what strategies or messages have you seen, whether in education, local industry, or higher education, that will successfully attract and retain talent? And how might these approaches be adapted to support Kentucky's effort? So I'm going to turn it over.
I'm not sure which one of us is going to start first, so I guess I'll take it. I'm Ellie Gilbert. I'm the Assistant Director in the Division of Educator Recruitment and Development. And we really don't have a lot to share with you in terms of our presentation, but we are here to get your input. We're preparing for a communications blitz to kind of highlight the need for quality teachers in our classrooms. We know that that is the #1 factor for student achievement, and we know that that does impact student attendance as well. If they have a quality teacher in the classroom, they're more likely to attend. So we are interested in hearing from you about the strategies and messaging that you've seen, maybe in education and maybe not, maybe in industry or higher ed, that can successfully attract and retain talent. And then we want to think about how can we adapt those into Kentucky schools. So kind of want to just open the floor, and if Dr. Stewart or Dr. Brewer have any other comments to add, they can certainly take it away, and I'll just be taking notes. I'm just super interested to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Ellie, for getting us started. And as Ellie has suggested, we're just really want to engage this expert audience, this diverse audience about what you're seeing around recruitment and retention, and things that are in the field and best practices that we can take back and utilize to try to continue to bring in the best and the brightest talent. And so we really value your input and your just knowledge of what you're seeing and how that can help us to move forward.
Thank you all. So I'll open it for comments. Again, we're looking for strategies or messages that have seemed to work to recruit talent in any industry that the office might apply towards teaching. Debbie, go ahead.
I just think it's funny that in the last conversation, and again, what comes to my mind is that culture of the building. And I used to say, as I would talk to people across the state, how do you get good math teachers? How do you get good science teachers? And we would say, we raise them here. So many of you are probably in the same boat, but many districts have their best and the brightest that come back because it's the culture of that building and they want to spend their lives in that. And so to me, I just think there it is again, the culture of the building, engagement of your teachers, engagement of your students. That's what pulls your best back into the industry. And it's getting harder to do that. But I think you still are successful. I know we have almost an entire English department that come from within. So Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. We're hearing that as we travel across the state as well, that culture is key.
Alan?
First of all, thank you for what you're doing. And I really like the framing of talking about attracting and retaining talent. And I think that's a bigger question overall in a way, because what if we thought about our schools as the talent development agencies with our kids, and then our teachers are therefore the ones who are the talented ones helping to cultivate that talent. And I say it that way because when I talk about things that way versus things about did you make your school student achievement test score goals, we're talking about investing in people in an asset-based way where they get to show off their talents, their skills, their strengths, their passions. I think that's what we have to be about as we try to attract talented educators, but it becomes a defeating systemic purpose if our schools, where we're going to find most of the new talent, have not experienced that. And they've experienced school as something very different that doesn't make them want to be teachers and doesn't want to make them part of this culture. So that's why I bring up that this really is related to the last presentation. It's absolutely related to our reimagining assessment and accountability work and United We Learn. We have for far too long thought our schools are mostly kind of like an industry where we're churning out people and still, unfortunately, pitting kids against kids about their test scores instead of seeing what they bring. And so we lose a lot of kids who have a lot of talent that we don't recognize and don't allow to develop. And some of those would be some of our greatest teachers if we could give them the best experience. So I do believe in growing your own or find them anywhere. But and then I think it really strategy-wise to really hone in on teachers. Our teachers have to be put in places with that great culture, but part of that great culture is not only are they supported, they actually want to have a place where their strengths and their talents and their interests and passions are recognized and their voice is heard. And unfortunately, we have too many school districts that might say, hey, let's do this new one-size-fits-all curriculum because we've seen that's been the case to pull these scores up or something. And the point is, from the teacher's perspective, they don't want to be a part of that. It's like you've taken me out of it. I don't even get to make decisions anymore. You're telling me what page to be on and what place to do and what to do. And why would I want to go and join that? So we've got to really look at our schools as the cultures and places where relationships are build that up. And look at this as about, we got a bunch of talented people and teachers and students, and we've got to say, to keep this going, we really have to start hitting those areas or we just won't have the pool of people to really recruit talent, and it'll go to other industries versus ourselves.
Alan, I think you and I could be good friends.
I love how you discuss that asset-based framing. I think that is something that we have to have, that asset base when we're talking about the field. And to your point, we are the advertisement right in the classroom for that next generation of teachers. So thank you.
One thing I would add that kind of builds off what we've heard is that I think because there's not really a financial incentive to go into teaching, you have to attract the personal, like the passion piece that was mentioned, and really the mission of teaching, helping young students. There are a lot of people who are mission oriented. And I think as much as we could do a campaign that connects to that, industries like social working, I mean, I'd be curious, people are going into that and feel like it's a calling almost. Well, that's what we have to get to teaching. And then the last thing, and I think it's on all of us as current professionals, is we have to do more to elevate teachers as professionals. I'm a third generation Kentucky educator, And I can see a change in how we view teachers as professionals. Lots of times that's coming from us as professionals. You know, when the public facing piece is very much, you know, not positive, it's hard to convince others that we are professionals. But I think this idea that teaching is a profession, and along with that, it's a profession that attracts lifelong learners. And if you want to keep learning and share the joy of learning, this is the field for you. Other comments from the committee? Carrie.
Thank you. Just a really brief comment. I was fortunate enough to chair or co-chair for KASA in part of their teacher recruitment work that they've been doing in retention work. I chaired the group that looked at teacher job satisfaction, and we actually partnered with Eastern Kentucky University, and we sent out a survey to every teacher in the state of Kentucky. We got close to 9,000 responses, and one of the questions that we asked in that survey was, what are the 3 most significant factors that negatively affect your job satisfaction? So again, going back to the source and asking our teachers directly, what is impacting you? And the top 3 answers were salary, student discipline, and time allocation. So in specifically time allocation meant having bathroom breaks, being able to have a planning period, a regular planning period every day where they were not covering for another teacher's classroom because of shortage of substitutes. So I think using those 3 areas that our teachers say is a problem is a good starting point for us to address the issue. And then again, culture trumps everything. So we have to always be working on building positive school and district culture.
Thank you for sharing. We're hearing some common themes that we have heard and are continue to hear that we need to lift up. So thank you.
Anyone else? Chuck.
Well, there's some things we're doing in Frankfurt that I really like. We're kind of connecting. We haven't done this before as a board. It's connecting with Kentucky State University, where as part of their Department of Education, we have invited them to come to be a part of us and explain to them what our school system is like, and explain to them that we want them to stay in our community, to live here in our community, and to be a part of our community. And we're giving a sign-on bonus to those students who signs on to be a teacher in our system. We're giving sign-on bonuses to folks that want to increase from rank 1 to rank 2 or whatever rank they want to go. So those bonuses are helping a lot to have retention to continue be strong in our district. The other thing is we're starting in high school, encouraging students to be a part of a class that talks about what education is about. And that helps a lot too, just talking to them, being in the classroom, sharing what education is about. The one other thing I want to mention is that we also use Kentucky State University Department of Education from that school in the classroom. So they come different days to work with students one-on-one, but they also are substitutes in our school system as well. So that gives them a clear view of what education is like. Thank you.
And Alan, another comment?
Yeah, thanks for indulging me. I just also thought that while we can grow our own, which is really important, we still won't have enough. And I think it's important for us to recognize this. We are in a national and international thing right now that's going on in terms of this. And so we have to be a destination place. And that's why it's so important for us to say, you need to come teach in Kentucky. Why? Because here's what we're doing differently. Here's where you can have a great profession and a professional life and a great regular life, right? We have to be able to do that. And that means we also have to address some of the barriers that get put up sometimes by what it means to become a teacher in Kentucky. I, for one, came from Iowa and had to bring my teaching credentials and stuff here. And it's not always very easy. And Iowa is actually a quite reputable state in terms of education and things like that. And yet to translate things and get your license and stuff here is something, the things that we have to at least think about. I'm not at all talking about lowering any kind of standards, but saying which things are most meaningful to saying whether or not you'll be a good teacher and what talent you have. And I know things like the praxis test and those kinds of things are actually quite big barriers that keep a lot of talent away, that are ones where they could be great teachers, because that test is not a good proxy for are you going to be a good teacher or not. And so I would ask us to look at what kinds of things are really the things so that we can make sure that we not only attract the best talent, but that we absolutely have an eye towards making sure that we can have teachers that, look like the students we have as well. So we're attracting the best talent in all different kinds of ways so that they have people to relate to and so forth. So I think it's really important that we look at how we become a destination state, because we're leading again in education like we did in Kara times. Let's do this and take that mantle on, and our student voice team has helped leading us. Let's move this to the next place so we can get the best teachers here, growing them on our own or pull them in, because this is the place to be.
Thank you, Alan. Martha, you have your hand up.
Yes. This is of particular interest to me. I have a teaching degree and haven't used it other than the first couple of years in a regular classroom setting, although I coached the speech and debate team at Paducah Tillman High School for 11 years, even though my business is running a bicycle store. And interestingly, in our business, both my husband and I have teaching degrees, and we elected not to go into the classroom. And we have a lot of friends who didn't go into the classroom after trying it. And so I felt like I had some things that I could add from a personal viewpoint here. Everybody has mentioned a lot of things that I think make a difference, and not being able to pay teachers in Kentucky or in any place in the United States certainly is a big factor, but it wasn't why I didn't go into teaching, because running a bike store also doesn't make you rich. Somebody mentioned passion, and I think that is really key, but identifying that passion, the classes that were mentioned that allow you in high school to start learning to be teachers, I think that can be even earlier. I think the earlier you can allow students to start helping other students and to get hands-on, the thrill of being the teacher, that really goes a long way. So certainly that's a good thing. But the age-old elephant in the room, which is very controversial and almost never addressed, is the fact that your top producers are not recognized, not just monetarily, but they also, and I was on site-based for 7 years, and I know that at least at our school system, and I think in many of them, there is a real reluctance to announce this teacher has done amazing things, or to recognize in many ways. There's like, let's go with keeping everybody equal. We don't want anybody to be upset. We don't want to recognize that this teacher is year after year getting this many kids passed on the AP test. I mean, maybe the Chamber of Commerce will have an education week and do that. But within the school systems, I think just like at our business, we recognize our top producers. not only do they get bonuses and things, but we put them in our newsletter and they get more responsibility of the responsibilities they want. One of the things that teachers have to do is you have to get your master's and you move up. But I have so many teacher friends who dislike that. They would like to become more educated in Spanish, for example, but they have to get their master's because of where they're located. And at Murray State, they can get a master's in, I think it's counseling or administration or general education. And that's not what they're interested in getting a master's in. Am I correct about that? That master's thing, you have to get your master's, and yet it often isn't in the field you're interested in.
You actually don't have to get your master's in so many years anymore. So that has been a barrier that has been removed for many teachers, because we too, like you, had limited choices at a period of time. Now it's expanded quite a bit, but there was a period where the master's choices were very limited.
So that's really good. I mean, because I felt like that was really a mistake. And I saw friends who, well, we have one friend who moved to North Carolina rather than not be able to get his master's in history and sociology because it wasn't offered near here, you know. So he teaches in North Carolina now. And that was some years ago, probably 10 years ago when he left. But at any rate, that's just some of the ideas from not being in the education system, but looking at it and really supporting education, but understanding that there are a lot of reasons why it would be hard to go into a school system and stay there all day long and not be allowed to leave. I love the one that you need to be able to have your own free hour and not have to take other people's classes and things like that. So I think that having two people here, and thank you all for being here, who are working on this, and this is really what you're concentrating on, is wonderful, because the way our schools go is the way our nation goes, and we have to have good teachers.
Thank you, Martha. Other comments? Okay, I'll turn it back over to the department for some closing comments on this topic.
Sure. I think you guys have been listening in on our conversations, because I heard a whole lot of things that we've been talking about as we've been planning and strategizing, and so that's very affirming to hear that those are the things that you think are important as well. Just to kind of touch base on a few things, we do have in Kentucky a teaching and learning career pathway that high schools can implement, and that does get our students several hours of dual credit, and that gets them prepared to start a teacher education program when they go into a college, gets them in the classroom when they're in high school, and that's definitely their favorite part of it. We would love to see that expanded. It is a very manageable program to implement. So, you know, if that's something that your district or your high school has not yet implemented, please reach out to us, because we would love to get you hooked up with that. We also have the Educators Rising Career and Technical Student Organization. I like to say, think of FFA for teachers. It is, you know, they get to test drive the teaching profession and be with other students who are interested in education as well. And we've grown that program tremendously. The first 5 years ago, I guess, when we started having our state convention, we had, you know, around 300 kids. This year, we're aiming at 1,400 students. So it's a very exciting day. And one thing you can do to help that is come to be a judge or be a spectator at that. If you're interested, please reach out. It's exciting because you feel the students' enthusiasm and the way that they want to impact the world is just so exciting. So we want to preserve that. And that does extend into the college level as well. So there is a college level of that. So 3 things that we really are planning to emphasize in this campaign is that teaching is an attractive profession. Teaching is accessible. So some of that barrier removal that you spoke to, and teaching is an appreciated profession. So those are kind of things that we really want to make sure the public knows. So thank you all so much for having us here.
And I think
Thank you
Carrie
so
has
much.
raised her hand. So Carrie, did you have one more
Sure.
comment before we let this topic go by?
Really quick, Ellie, I just had a quick question for you at the department. Is there any work being done right now to incorporate our teaching and learning pathway to be a CTE pathway?
That's a tricky question. And it is being done. We are still really, the bottom line issue, I think, there is that there's not a certificate that they can, like, they don't get a credential at the end of it because there's not really a lot they can walk straight out of the high school into to do other than maybe being a para educator. So that is kind of where we're looking at with that one. But it's a little tricky to navigate all of the different requirements. So yes, that is definitely a consideration that we're working on.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Again, another wonderful discussion linked together, all committed to making Kentucky students have a better environment for learning. We're going to move on, and I think you'll like this based on some of the comments. Jennifer Stafford from the Department of Assessment and Accountability is here to offer us some insight into the Kentucky United We Learn update and what's been going on. We spent a lot of time in our September meeting talking about this, so we asked her to come back and give us a quick update. Jennifer.
Thank you, Janabeth, and congratulations to you and Heather for your nomination and approval for the leadership. So thank you very much for your leadership there, and to the presentations and the presenters that have been here so far. It's been rich and engaging conversation. Members, you've brought such insight to those conversations. So thank you very much. We're excited about the United We Learn initiative because it's in a phase that is exciting and working toward making systemic changes for all of our students and all of our teachers. We're looking for this conversation today is how can local communities get involved in creating a fair, transparent, and equitable local accountability system that supports all students. And that's one of the recurring themes that we've heard today with our conversations around chronic absenteeism. And also with the teachers, how can we support them as well with this initiative in reimagining assessment and accountability? The United We Learn, just briefly, you'll recall that this is a community-based initiative. We've been at this since 2020 when Dr. Glass started his Keep, Stop, Start survey and had a lot of input. I don't think we had 9,000 respondents, but like the other one did, but we had a good turnout and a good response back that led to the Kentucky United We Learn report. And the big themes that came out of that that report were around vibrant learning experiences for every student. And I think this is where some of the previous conversation went, because those vibrant learning experiences are deep, they're engaging, they're dynamic learning activities that students can be involved in that could oftentimes be hands-on, maybe application of knowledge, but activities and vibrant learning experiences that really engages our students in their learning, providing them ways that they can capture their own interest and keep them engaged and hopefully want to be there because the learning is more enjoyable to them. It's more relevant to what they want to eventually be or do. So looking at those vibrant learning experiences, giving the students and involving students in actively engaging in their learning. The second big theme that came from the United We Learn report and all the feedback around how people across the bluegrass wanted to change the education system. They also wanted to encourage innovation, especially around assessments. So looking at different ways to assess, looking at different types of assessments, giving teachers parameters in which they can share together with instructional resources, some practices, giving them the ability to develop these deeper, richer learning experiences, and then celebrating those accomplishments. Also, the other big theme is around creating bold new futures through collaboration with communities. And so looking at how to involve different types of community members within the local district. So giving the stakeholders that are in that community that support their students that are in the district, providing ways that they can contribute to supporting the school, the students, and also the teachers. So really developing this local piece and this local collaboration like that we have here on this council, bringing together diverse perspectives and allowing them input into what the local district then will hold themselves accountable for. So the shift from a local accountability and really kind of minimizing the focus of our federal accountability. So I think that this moonshot goes right along with the conversations today. The moonshot, or that long-term goal, is to build a prosperous Kentucky. We will launch an accountability system, and I will add assessments to that, that is meaningful and useful to our students. And again, creating that sense that they are having agency. Students are having agency, they're having voice in the decisions, that our local communities can have input on what the school or district is holding themselves accountable for. And again, minimizing that comparison that is oftentimes associated with an accountability system. So having different types of systems and really minimizing that undesirable competition, if you will. The Kentucky United We Learn Council is again made up of diverse learners. We have right now about 55 members, led by Penny Christian, a chair, Jim Flynn, who's the vice chair, and then Karen Dodd is our chief performance academic officer here at the department. We've had different structures over the years that we've been working. We've had committees, and then we've had most recently work groups. At this point, we're working really as a whole council, making council level decisions on the different the different proposals. Now, to meet this moonshot, it's a long-term goal, because what we're reaching for is to have proposed legislation in the 2026 legislative session. So next year, have legislation to be considered. So that seems like a long way away, because, we're like, why not, go during this legislative session? But there's a lot of work to be done to get to that proposal, because we are bringing in so many voices, and we're bringing in so much collection of data and discussions and talking. We've been developing prototypes over the summer. We've continued to have legislative awareness, but because any changes to an assessment system or an accountability system will have to have state changes to our statutes and our regulations. So we have to have our legislators support to impact the change that we're looking for. So we're continuing legislative awareness. We do have members of the Kentucky United We Learn who are legislators. Representative Tipton is an active member. And in the last couple of convenings, we've had other legislators involved in the discussion as well. And throughout different presentations, we have been able to be in front of multiple legislators. So they're hearing it, and then we'll move into the advocacy phase along the way. So we'll have some different multiple steps and some advocacy for supporting that. So again, I want to highlight here the fact that there's a real specific shift from the focus on federal accountability or as a whole to a local accountability system. So balancing out the fact that there are federal laws in place right now that we have to meet. We have to meet those. So we're saying let's meet the federal laws that are currently in place, streamline that, and allow space for these other innovative practices in a local level. So through stakeholder input, we've heard that this local accountability system is desired so that our local districts can work with community members and determine what's important to them for their school or district to be successful. Now, we've got several pieces that, again, are going to be mandated for our federal accountability. It's always going to be reading and math. It's going to be progress on English language proficiency. We'll all continue with transition readiness, graduation rate, looking at the elimination of the color system, and elimination of change, that change component that is really complex in the current system, and moving to individual student growth. Have those as the base of the federal, but then it's streamlined so that it gives the local districts more of the ability to have that local decision making. And for example, we could have one district that could decide that in their local accountability system, they wanted to focus on the level of or number of AP classes, for example, that they want to offer, and the number of students that participate in AP courses, and then maybe the percentage of that pass the exam. If that's not a local context or a local priority, maybe something around social emotional supports in the district, maybe that's something that the local district can determine that is important to them and their community. So they would develop their own local accountability system and determine what those non-academic considerations are that are important to them. Looking at with the local accountability, having some things that are non-negotiables. And Devin, if you'll go back that just one slide, looking at requiring that our districts have a vibrant learning experience indicator, if you will, in their local accountability system, so that our students are engaging in those vibrant learning experiences. Now, they can start out with being just the percentage of students who are participating in vibrant learning experiences, or maybe they're to the point that they've got vibrant learning experiences, they've been doing it for a while, they feel very confident in their approaches. Maybe a district like that in their local accountability system could look at the quality of their vibrant learning experiences. So again, all around local decision making and local context for their local accountability system. And then again, identifying that the federal system and reducing it to what we have to do federally. And again, that is currently identifying the schools in need of support, which would be our schools for comprehensive school and support and improvement, targeted support and improvement, and then the additional targeted support and improvement. So having two separate systems, a federal system and then a local system that then would then kind of be displayed. Okay, now Devin, if you go to the next slide. So that's the big highlight for the Kentucky United We Learn. Additional pieces are about reducing the assessment burden from the state level, moving from a requirements of state mandated assessments in social studies and writing to a more optional assessment in those two content areas that would be offered by the state. If the local district had more performance based assessments that they would rather do in lieu of a state assessment in social studies and writing, then they could do their own local performance-based assessment in those content areas, and then let that be part of their local accountability system as well. Other assessment pieces that are included would be the inclusion of assessments in reading and math throughout the year. So there would be a proposal in, or the current discussion is that there would be 2 interim assessments that would replace the local school districts interim assessments that they are currently purchasing. Many districts purchase like MAP or STAR or iReady, those type of things. Shifting that to the state system and developing that as a state so that it reduces the financial burden on the districts, and they can use that money that they put toward those assessments for other instructional needs. And then making that system where it's aligned completely to the Kentucky academic standards as well. Then the current conversation is having that third interim be the test, or to be a summative assessment that would meet those federal guidelines and those federal requirements for identifying proficiency. So shifting and reducing that assessment burden, continuing though with science instruction and state level assessment that is included in the federal system. So lots of changes are being discussed right now, and it's an exciting time. A framework is being developed. And so we've gone with the prototypes. We've had feedback on those prototypes, and we're ready now to move to the next step to show a comprehensive system of accountability as well as assessments. So if this meeting happened next week on a Tuesday, I would have been able to share that framework with you. But our next step on the framework is to meet with our Kentucky United We Learn Council tomorrow. So we've got 2 sessions with our Kentucky United We Learn Council there for them to review and give feedback on the framework to see if we've captured their desires in the framework from our last meeting. Our last meeting was in October. And so want to make sure that we continue to refine and update as we go along, making sure that those important voices are captured within that. The convening tomorrow then will be with the local superintendent advisory council, LSAC, on Tuesday of next week. So we get to celebrate Thanksgiving with LSAC. And so we'll share with them, instead of a turkey leg, we'll share the framework with them and get their feedback as well. So that's the next step, to go to LSAC. And then the next step will be the Kentucky Board of Education meeting, December 4th and 5th. Now, since we created this slide, I will note for you that we are developing a set of town halls with the commissioner. We've contacted all of the educational co-ops, and we've got several dates in place for January, excuse me, that we're going to meet with every co-ops board and have discussions with local co-op boards. And then after their board meeting, we're going to stay in that community for a town hall discussion. So I would encourage each of you to join one of those town halls and be part of the discussion moving forward, because we're really, this is, again, where I started. It is a community-based effort, an initiative. It's not KDE is saying this is the way it's going to be, but we're really involving lots of stakeholders and community members within within the local communities. So let me pause there and see if we have any comments or questions.
Anything for Jennifer on this? Our next topic is also assessment and accountability related, but we thought an update from United We Learn would be important. Alan.
I'm sorry, I seem to be dominating this morning. I don't mean to be, but I do have a couple of questions. First of all, Jennifer, thank you so much for all the work that you've done and on all of this stuff. I have a couple of questions and comments I think to make. First of all, I really, of course, love the mission where we end up with that we're trying to create an accountability system that's meaningful and useful to our learners. And I emphasize that word learners on the end because I think it includes more than just the students, but it's our teachers as learners, our principals as learners, our community members as learners, and yes, even our legislators as learners. So I think that's really important to make sure that all of this has to be meaningful for all those different groups and useful. And then another real technical question, it's not technical, I should say it's short, versus the bigger one I'm going to ask later, is when you're doing the town halls in January, Jefferson County itself kind of is its own educational cooperative. Will you be coming to Jefferson County too? Or
yes.
Just okay, perfect. Thank you. And then the other thing I want to harken back to is the requirement for the federal things. I know the things in ESSA and all the other different things that have been required. I've been involved with that nationally, all the way through No Child Left Behind, all the way through those transitions. One of the things that was offered when I was on the systems change team, I think, when Dr. Pruitt was here, and we put forth a recommendation that, yes, of course, we have to always do the things that are federally required. But because of how those are actually put in kind of different buckets, we suggested that we should put some of the things that are not required into those things too, not instead of, but too. And unfortunately, our recommendation was not adopted. Dr. Pruitt went a different way, and we put some of the things, he put some of the things that we had said to do all in its own bucket. And I kind of heard you say something about we're going to have two kind of systems, a federal one and a local one. But here's where I'm wondering, and so I'm very curious about the framework and about the thinking around this. Is there not a way that we can communicate federally that the local measures too are part of our federal push forward? Even on reading or on math, if we have local performance-based ways or ways to capture to, not instead of, then the reason I think it's really important that we do that, because if we don't do that, is this. Everyone will say, well, the federal one still counts more. And what we're working on is trying not to do two systems, but rather one coherent system. And I don't have a problem with capturing the local stuff on its own as well. But some of the stuff that fits, if it applies to any of the federal requirements, I think we should be communicating that just as powerfully forward, because it could be that we're saying on these test scores we're giving the feds, we may have not shown this, but look at this other way we've captured things and it does show this. And I don't want to only capture that in the local bucket. I want to communicate that to the federal bucket. So to me, this seems like not an either or, but a both and more. And so I'm curious to hear your comments or thinking around how the construct is being developed so that we can propel the stuff that comes from students that are not just the required test score things, also get pushed forward to the federal, so we can paint our story nationally about how we use these things for the powerful thing it tells about our learners, instead of just say, well, here's what we communicate to the feds and here's what we communicate locally.
Yes, so we're trying to do something very similar, Alan. We're trying to balance that the federal and local. So we're trying to have a balance of that autonomy with our input from our districts and giving them the flexibility and empowerment to make decisions around what is important in, again, their local context, and give them the ability to collaborate with educators, with parents, with family members, legislators, business people, and really building the trust and developing those systems that reflect those community priorities. Now, with that, the federal is about comparisons, and it has to be strictly comparable, and so giving our local districts the autonomy to make their own decisions is kind of a different aspect of the strictly comparison to the ability to make your own decisions and have your own local accountability. So those two things are trying to be balanced, giving the value of our educators that flexibility to engage with their communities and engage with their local their local members and communities, and building that collaboration with them. And so having that support from those business people is very empowering to the local district. So I hear what you're saying, and we're trying to balance those pieces.
Other comments? Let's see. I think it's Carrie. Your hand's up.
Yes. Hi, Jennifer. I just wanted to say thank you to you and Rhonda for the work that you're doing on this. Rockcastle County Schools is in year 3 of having a community-based or a local-based accountability model. And what our model looks like year 3 is very different than it looked like in year 1. So I want to thank you for your efforts for allowing local districts to have the autonomy to develop what's important to their local community members and their educators and their students. I hope that through this process, we don't ever lose that, because if it's truly local, then we have to listen to what our local educators and our community members and our business members are saying that they value in the education that we're providing to our students. So thank you all. You have worked tremendously hard on this, and I just wanted to take the opportunity to say thanks.
Well, thank you, Carrie. And that's no small feat to lift up and create your own local accountability system. So thank you for being on the forefront of that initiative and being an exemplar for other districts that haven't thought about it or started it.
Okay, I think that is it. Jennifer, we know we will hear more from you as this work continues. It's almost a standing item on our agenda, but it is exciting. I would encourage you, if you want to know more, the Board of Education is just like our meeting. You can tune in and check it out, and you'll be able to see kind of where this lands by the time they get to the Board of Education on December 4th and 5th. So we're going to move on, and Jennifer's going to stay on, and we're going to add Helen Jones and Rhonda Sims, also members of OAA, and we're going to talk about some assessment and accountability updates. And really, we're just going to hear about some of the highlights and challenges. So I'm not certain who's starting, ladies, but I'll turn it over to you all.
So I can kick us off, and then I'll shift to Rhonda. So what
thank
we're
you, Jennifer.
looking, yes, thank you. We're looking for what were highlights and challenges of communicating the results of 2024. Through our assessment and accountability system, we made the decision to go ahead and release results as soon as possible after we completed all of our quality control checks. And so that meant that we did not have that public display of a school report card. And so we have released the assessment data in spreadsheets. We have a new web page that was created just to house those spreadsheets. We know that was not ideal to communicate, because the dashboard is, and those images are a really good communication aspect. So what we're looking for in this conversation, your highlights and challenges with the most recent release of accountability and assessment data. And then we also had some questions about the science assessment and the current performance of our students in our science. So I'll turn to Rhonda for that.
Thank you,
piece of
Jennifer.
conversation.
And again, what an exciting meeting it's been, and what great feedback from this group. Congratulations on your selection again of Jana Beth and Heather to serve in your leadership roles, and what a fabulous team there you have behind you, ladies, to back up the conversation with this group. You know, we've talked a lot about future endeavors, and there's great excitement around the future. At the same time that we're building this future system, again, from that ground up approach with United We Learn and all the various groups we're coming to, just like SCAAC, we also have to kind of maintain the current. So I kind of think about it, we're in the process of designing and building a new house, but we're still living in a house. And we have to do some attention to it. We have to keep it maintained, because we're not yet ready to move to the new house. There's some transitional things that have to occur here. And so we're most interested, as Jennifer said, and kind of saying, what have been the challenges, what have been the pieces that have resonated with you about this most recent release. And the one that probably has been the most attention for us, based on questions and comment, has been the performance in science. So I'll remind you, science is one of those 3 subjects that is federally required for a consistent assessment across student groups. And it's tested once per content level. So once at elementary, middle, and high. And so to kind of start our conversation, we want to build kind of a common context, a little bit of the history here of what we're seeing with science, as well as focusing on this performance that pattern we're seeing at high school and the concerns around that, and what are some options that we've been exploring around those things. So as we look at this little chart, we've shared this in a number of groups, it gives you a sense of the current assessment that was taken in the spring of 24, and what were the decision points for when you leave a performance level, such as novice to apprentice, apprentice to proficient, proficient to distinguished. So the student performance levels. So if we look here beginning in 2018, the work was ongoing. Commissioner Pruitt was here, very involved in science. Kentucky teachers very involved in science, and we'll highlight some ways they were involved over the next couple of slides. But in 2018, we actually began implementing the first new, quite different science standards that are really oriented around teaching around scientific phenomenon and being a bit cross subcontent of science. So those standards are structured quite differently than the science standards we'd had previous to 2018. And in 2018, elementary and middle school was launched in terms of testing with the new science. Now, we had a year of lag for high school because you may remember, those of you that have some history in the system, we at one point had end of course testing at high school, and we utilized the ACT end of course testing program. So it was a purchased off the shelf program. That program began to sunset from ACT about the same time the department was saying, well, we really don't know that this is quite connecting to our standards the way it needs to be. And so high school was on a little slower path in implementing than elementary middle. So you'll notice there in a little subscript 2, where it talks about the percentage of performance at high school in 2018, that was actually based on using the ACT. So we used the ACT for 1 year as transition to meet the federal requirement. But from 2019 forward, for all levels, we were assessing the first version of the science phenomenon oriented Kentucky Kentucky academic standards for science. So in 2018, we set the standards for elementary middle. In 2019, I think we did a little bit of validation, but we brought high school in and set those high school standards. So I want to kind of remind you that once you set a standard for when students move for performance levels, you really keep those locked in place until you have a change with the assessment. This is not something you look at annually. It's not something that you change annually, but rather when you have your test in place, it goes through its review federally, which is called a peer review process. You lock those standards in place and then you continue to apply them. Now, obviously, we know what occurred across the world in 2020 and 2021. So we were just getting started when we had a COVID break. And then we come back in 22 through the 24 cycle that we've just reported. So you can see if we look first at elementary, kind of starting with the positive, we actually continued to improve a bit. There's a slight decline from 23 to 24, but we actually continued to sort of hold the course with a little bit of slight improvement at elementary. At middle, we had sort of consistent performance at 18, 19. You had that break. There was a drop when we come back in 22, not uncommon. There were drops across almost all content areas and subjects post-COVID, just like you've spent a lot of time talking about just the issue of getting kids in school and back in with chronic absentee this morning. So there's a definite break in what we see pre-COVID and post-COVID. And so you again see around 22% that are proficient distinguished. So remember, that's the upper two levels of performance. There's also a novice and apprentice level. So at high school, the pattern that is concerning is what we see here with the really kind of decline and significant decline each year beginning in 22, 23, and 24. Now, and again, high school only had that 1 year in 2019. Now, another thing that we just found interesting, so I share it just as a point of interest, not that we think it's an explanation for everything. When we look at the students who took the high school test in 24 for science, those students had not had a state science test since elementary school. They were middle schoolers when COVID occurred. So we have no sense looking, really historically, kid by kid, of what would have happened with those students in middle school. So I just find that an interesting point. It kind of helps point out, the bigger social context we're in here with the performance. So obviously, this is a pattern that's continued to concern us. We already began some efforts to move us forward with the refreshment of the assessment, including the standards. And we're going to talk in a little detail about that with you to, again, give you a little bit more context as we move to the next slide. So just to remind you of some things, because again, anytime you have something that draws attention related to assessment and accountability, as this performance did this year with those the low percentage we have at Proficient Distinguished, that we got a lot of questions and commentary that wasn't quite accurate. And then we got things that were accurate. So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page and understanding what kind of tests we have in science. What are some terms we use, how teachers are involved in these processes. So KSA, the Kentucky Summative Test, is required in state law to be a criterion referenced assessment. Now that's in comparison to a norm reference test. So criterion reference means you're measuring how students relate to a set of criteria. And in this case, that's Kentucky's standards, the Kentucky academic standards in this instance for science. This is true. These statements are true for all the content area assessments we administer. So there is not a decision. There is not a norming. Norming is how your student is performing compared to a norm set group, a sampling group, or to other students who took the test the same year. That's a norm percentile. So as we look at criterion reference, it's criterion reference test, the state law, as well as it would be the appropriate thing to do, and we did it before we had, quote, a state law here, is Kentucky teachers need to be very heavily involved in whatever process of assessment and accountability that you bring forward. Whether it's some of our exciting newer work that's moving forward when it is completed, I'll use Jennifer's term, the long on-ramp to get it fully implemented, or it's what's current. So Kentucky teachers are involved with the standards, the content standards, how they're developed, how they're revised, how they're reviewed. That is very specifically laid out in state law, and you've had several presentations across time for those of you who've been on the committee for a while from the Office of Teaching and Learning around that, how that occurs. The blueprint alignment assessments have to have a blueprint to kind of give the relative emphasis of the content area that should be seen in the assessment. So they're involved with the creation of that. And then our contractors and staff in OAA utilize that blueprint and putting together assessments and reporting it. The development of the actual items, very heavily developed. The science items are very heavily developed by Kentucky teachers. Sometimes teachers review development of items, make suggestions that in the case of science, very much created by Kentucky teachers. And then standard setting, that idea of when do you look at the scale and say, when does a student move from one performance level to the other? So teachers are very heavily involved in all of those aspects and processes of assessment creation in Kentucky. A couple of other highlights to just bring a couple points here that kind of go along with this, provide a little bit more detail, is the cut scores are assigned that NAPD representing achievement on grade level content standards. So they are set by elementary, by middle, and by high school. And they're set up on a scale. So it isn't, sometimes we get questions, well, how many items must I get right to be in one of these categories? The test difficulty, the item difficulty is factored in across different forms of the test. This is standard. Same thing ACT uses, that you take a form or a test in one year and you compare the score on other years. So those same kind of process are expected in state tests that are used for federal purposes. So we've put a little copy here of the scale, and the scale is not what you call equally divided. So it links back to student work, and that work is mapped onto this scale as part of that standard setting process. So it isn't, oh, I'll have these 50 points here and then another 50 points. It's not divided in an equal number approach. So the performance level cuts also determined to the standard don't change year to year. We've already mentioned that. These stay in place. So what we reported in 24 is the exact same cuts And actually, the test has a lot of commonality from what we had beginning back to 2019 for high school. We have released items. That's a requirement as well. So some items leave the pool, but the items were actually all created for science back in that early 2018, 2019 timeframe. And they remain in the pool until they matriculate out through public release. There are no predetermined limits for how many students can be in a certain level or at a certain score. We've had some questions around that, oh, you'll only allow so many kids or a certain percentage kids to be in a category. That is not a true statement. Every year, based on students' performance and how it maps to these cuts and scales, you're put into the category is used for reporting. Percentiles are created, and I think sometimes that adds to some confusion. There is a report of a percentile to both to schools and to parents, but the percentile is that yearly look of how did this student do compared to other students who took that assessment. It's not used to establish whether you're a novice, apprentice, proficient, or distinguished. They're meant to be supplemental. And basically, you can see a little description there of what a percentile, how it works. If you're at the 88th percentile, it means that you scored at that place where 88% of students score who took the test or are higher. And that another way to look at it is 12% did not have that higher score. So we generate a percentile really for informational purposes. And for years, we've had programs like, for instance, Duke Talent Search that expect to see a percentile for applications. So we report one, but it's not used to generate where you are. So to look just one more step for the background as we get into what some changes are ahead, let's talk just a little bit about the standards. And I think Jennifer, you want to talk a little bit about the standards here?
Sure. So all of our Kentucky academic standards are required to go through a process that is legislated. There are multiple committees that of teachers. Kentucky teachers are part and make the determinations around our academic standards. So the process that was written years ago has multiple committees that include an advisory panel that the teachers provide input on the standards and how they should change, or what is included, maybe what's included at a different grade level. So there's a regular process that teachers look at, revise, review standards for each of our contents. After the advisory panel gets through their edits to the standards, then there's a review committee, again, comprised of content area experts, teachers in the field in that particular content area. And then there's a process review committee after those first two committees to make sure that the process was actually put in place and they did what they were expected to do with that. Now, along with that process, the assessment blueprint is included in that review. So all of our content areas have been through this now. And actually science was I want to say was the first of the content areas. And now has come back to review. It has to happen every so often, I want to say 7 years, that they have to go through that process. So the Kentucky Academic Standards in Science went through that process in 2022 and were approved by the board late in 22 and incorporated then into law in July of 23. Now, because those standards were reviewed, then what we were able to do, because there were tweaks to the standards, we were able then to go in to begin developing new items for the science assessment. So we brought together, people, content area experts to develop items to begin assessment refresh. So students will experience those new items in the spring of 2025. So because, again, those standards, those academic content standards were revised, then the assessment is aligning to those new content standards. So some of the goals for these new items and the upcoming assessment is to provide entry points for all students. And what that means is that when you develop assessment, and many of us have been classroom teachers, when you start out an assessment, you want to give students the ability to get into the questions so that they can have build some confidence in their test administration. So giving some entry points for all students while maintaining the alignment to those Kentucky academic standards and that is aligned blueprint. One of the things we also heard is that the reading load for our current assessment is a lot. Through the online system, students have the ability to click through multiple documents, whether they are providing passages or graphs, information that has to be then utilized within those questions, reducing some of that burden both in the online as well as the paper format, and then providing that broader content coverage of the content so that we have a broad range of all of our subcomponents on there.
So the process that we're really using here is the normal process that when you have an assessment and you have redone standards, you've gone through another revision, which Jennifer just laid out that time frame. You have, in state law, we have about 2 years then to get an assessment in place that matches up to the revised standards. We have accelerated that because of what we are seeing and hearing from teachers around the fact that the test is a long set of items, about 8 items, at least, that link to the phenomenon. We have begun to say what kinds of new items can we incorporate to just, again, I think our word of the day is balance, to provide balance within the assessment. So we've really worked to accelerate the process by at least a year. So we would typically do some field testing this year, some more field testing next year, and bring people together for standard setting like in 26. We feel like we need to move forward more rapidly. We need to look at the issues and the context. So I will say to you that when, we always, as the results are released, there is a lot of third-party checking of everything, all the processes, all the psychometric issues of how the test is performing. We actually went back and did an extra check of everything. And we can't locate anything within the test itself that's an issue, that a psychometric reason for the performance. So we're moving forward to do the refreshment as we would normally do, but accelerating it, making it quicker. And part of this is we'll continue a lot of item types that are already there. There'll still be some items that are longer clusters, but embedded within that, we'll also have some standalone items, some shorter clusters where there's less for a student to have to read and to utilize, but still linked up item sets, a little bit more like the design we see in social studies, where there are shorter clusters that are around common phenomenon or common historical documents if you were looking at social studies. And it should sort of, again, put more sort of balance in the assessment, still linking to our standards. So that is the plan moving forward. Now, I do want to mention that at high school, we do think there has to be some more look and conversation because of, I would kind of describe the triangulation between the standards, the assessment, the curriculum, and the instruction. So if you think about high school, and I know I've got Debbie on here who's been a long-term high school connected person. We have others. High schools tend to deliver science by courses. So kids are signing up for biology. They're signing up for chemistry. They're signing up for a physics class, or space science. But the assessment is more of an integrated sort of approach around the phenomenon. So I think we have to look at that. And when I say look at it, I'm not suggesting that everyone needs to change how we're delivering instruction at high school, but I think we need to look at the connections between those. Are there things that can be done to just help communicate standards and how they can fit better into the coursework? Are there adjustments we can make moving forward on the assessment? We also think we need to bring together some teachers to sort of analyze the released items. What are things that would improve the items themselves moving forward? So we kind of have this, much of what we talk about in assessment accountability, we kind of have phased in approaches. So this is the first phase. Let's refresh the assessment. We've already done the work to get new item types created. Let's get those in front of kids and then utilize those and set standards again this year. It would be like in the late summer type time frame, and set standards. Now, what also that will cause is the test will be a little longer for students to take because there will be more items, and it may delay some of the reporting. We anticipate there will be a delay of reporting because of the resetting of standards. But we do feel it's important to go ahead and refresh the assessment based on our current standards. But I think more long term, we need to also do some examination of just how this plays out in science, because this seems to be a science high school pattern. So I think we need to look at high school, how this plays out, what other factors could be influencing that, going into that performance that we see. We'll look at some of our research groups that we work with to do some examining of some of those things, and we're working and having conversations with our Office of Teaching and Learning as well. But I do think that to be kind of fully look at everything, we need to look forward at that as also one of the pieces. So we'll pause there and kind of open it up to, again, any discussion of science, or then more generally, as you've released this year, what have been some challenges or things you either want to talk about in a positive thing, or things that have been a challenge for you.
Josh, you had your hand up.
Yes, I'm one of those high school folks, and we've had a lot of conversation in PLC, a lot of conversation at the district level, and I've worked through our co-op and with the science folks at KDE to, just trying to get some ideas. Sure. But I think with the possibility of a new assessment system, I think, and I guess this is more just me sounding off. It's not a disagreement or whatever, however I want to say that. But with high school, being 3 years of content leading up to that test, and thinking about switching to an integrated approach or something like that. I mean, you're talking 3 years of implementation there. Mm-hmm. And we're just concerned about the newer, what the work that we're doing, how much the science assessment would change, and if it would be worth changing our course sequence, or waiting until the new science assessment, if it goes through, how that looks. I don't know. It's just a lot of unknown, and
sure.
It's like we've got this refreshed design, and that's what we're going to be with for at least until 26, 27. But it's a lot of unknown, and we want to make our goal is to improve as fast as possible, but it's just just so much unknown. So just want to that.
Sure. Absolutely. I would let me add one comment to it because I do think, anytime we have things shifting, there's nervousness around that. I think the piece that you can very firmly lock in, though, is the standards. The standards are in place. The standards have gone through a revision. And we do know from our work with teachers and then an independent alignment that's required federally beyond that, the test measures the standards. The high school test was hard. It's a hard assessment. Standards are challenging, but they measure the standards. So I think as your PLCs, you're doing the work with teachers, looking at the standards and how are you incorporating the standards in just your normal course structure. So I certainly think that's the first critical step. And I'll see if any other KDE folks would like to add to that. I think you want to ground in the standards, and there might be others that would have comment about that as well. Jennifer, because again, the item types, just keep in mind, they're kind of smaller versions of the clusters that have always been there. So it's just there would be less reading and fewer numbers of items linking to the same sort of charts and graphs. So you've got these long sort of cluster sets, kind of like a reading passage where you're looking at lots of things and answering 8 items that kind of link together to that passage. So we're suggesting let's do some where there are 4 items that link to that, and there's less reading to be involved. So they're not going to be wildly different than what we've had, but they're going to be less of a load for reading and less of a load that everything is linking together with 8. Now, standalone items, we have those in all assessments. They would be just general science items that, again, will measure those standards. And short answer is obviously where students respond. Jennifer, do you have a comment?
Yes, I would also look at within the standards, you have the disciplinary core ideas, you have the cross-cutting concepts, and you have the science and engineering practices. So those 3 things come together in the assessment. And so if those also need to come together in our instruction, in our curriculum, at the local level. So I think that in addition to looking at the standards, looking at how those pieces come together in the classroom.
Very good comments, Josh. We appreciate those.
Heather, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just want to thank Rhonda for explaining that so well. A lot of folks, when they look at science scores of how our students are performing, the way that the courses are laid out and taught at a high school, that is a lot of information to be assessed, 3 years worth, on one assessment. A lot of folks don't understand there are multiple forms of that test, so not every child is taking the same assessment. I remember prior to 2018 when we had end of course, now that was just on biology, but I think if we would look at data, our results probably looked a little differently than what they do now because they were assessed at the end of that course. Not suggesting we have those end of course again, but I do think aligned to the standards and an assessment that is scaled back, aligned to standards, that is not so bulky, I do think that you're going to see some different results. And a lot of us that are DACs have talked across the state, and I don't think our scores really represent what our kids know and are able to do, because we have many kids, not just our district, but districts all across our state that are going on post-high school, post-graduation, and are doing incredible things in their careers, in their college courses. So it's a shame that the assessment is not reflective of what our kids are able to do, number one. Number two, I do think it's a little hefty. It's asking too much in one assessment. So any form of scaling back, I will tell you, a lot of high school folks, and especially those that have been around for a while, are in favor of end of course type assessments.
for the end of the course, but end of course aligned to our standards, not how it was previously. But if we had end of course assessments that were aligned, and that way, no matter when the child finished that course, whether it was the freshman year, sophomore year, or junior year, they would take that assessment for that course aligned to our standards. And I think you would see a different overall ranking or rating of our students on how they're performing their proficiency. I just think that would look a lot different. So I think currently, I think our kids are doing well, but this assessment is not allowing them to show what they know and what they can do. But thank you for explaining that, Ron, at the beginning, because I think that's really important.
That's a great comment, Heather. And I will say that there are states, obviously we've looked at other states that have similar structures to their standards as Kentucky, and there are states that have moved to the notion of an end of course, utilizing standards that have a similar structure as Kentucky standards. So we have seen that bubbling up in a few states. So I don't, I think that is a comment they're getting. And I agree with you, the assessment is a 1 point in time. It is a one time at high school. It is measuring, as Josh brought up, sort of 3 years of instruction before the kids get to it. So we know that there are good science teachers out there doing good things every day in their classroom, and that students are being successful with science. It's just, how do we then design the assessment and have it linked to our standards, and how do we modify that over time? This approach that we're talking about immediately is just getting in a year in advance items, getting them tested, and looking at the cuts again. But I do think we're talking about a need to look at some more long-term conversation. And I think it dovetails nicely with what might come out of the framework, because we're going to have some new plans moving forward for assessment and accountability. So it's a perfect timing.
Alan, you had a comment?
Yeah, just a couple of things. First of all, to Jennifer, can you say again those 3 things in science? You said disciplinary core ideas, something about engineering, whatever. Can you say what those 3 things are again?
Yes, it's the disciplinary core concepts, the cross-cutting concepts, disciplinary core ideas, and the science and engineering practices.
Cross-cutting concepts. Okay. Thank you. Those for me are important to know. I know those things, like with the math practices and everything. There's these ways that we kind of move toward a more, not just discrete standard, but rather the aggregates of kinds of knowledge, skills, and dispositions that we have, and that every content area has different ways of calling those forward. I appreciate that. So it brings me to this question. How is all this trying to connect with or integrate with our portrait of a learner? And why is that competency-based approach, those bigger parts of the person, of the learner, why are those not things we are also relating to, with the power of those, for kids to be able to see how these standards fit within the competencies? To me, it seems like there's a grain size part when we say we have all the parts, but we have parts that are smaller, parts that are bigger, and then we say do both things, but they're separate from each other. And there's no wonder kids, from their learner experience, from their learner perspective, get a whole bunch of stuff thrown at them, some this size, some this size, but they're all apart from each other, and they're asked to then, on an assessment, put it all back together. And some of the things we might think are most important, they're not even asked to do. I mean, what do kids create or show, or what do kids demonstrate that they put on their own when it's only a 3-year, a test that's over 3 years and mostly done in the same psychometric ways? So just like we brought up with the rich comments before by Josh and Heather, I think it's a lot asking of students to be able on one assessment that goes back to things that they were introduced way earlier and may have been introduced in a much different way than in a thoughtfully integrative way, and in a way that I would include, we can't be teaching these portrait of a learner things separate, like, oh, now we're doing standards and now then we got to shift to competencies. And we somehow from a kid's perspective, we've got to have these so they relate. So for me, I've got some questions about the approaching of doing this. Not every single item might be good and each team did it and did it well. I get all that, but I'm talking about the overall construct is
Sure.
a little bit something I'm facing kind of a great challenge because I don't see us moving towards that more learner-centered competency-based way. And then just to go back to what we talked about earlier in this meeting today, both with the first two segments about attendance and engagement and those kinds of things, I have to wonder if this ends up being the end that we all are trying to strive for to get kids to succeed on. What will that do to the design of learning experiences that for sure can make sure kids stay engaged and have their interests met and have ways that are applied, because they may not show up on this kind of assessment, especially if it was 3 years ago. So I know it's a lot. I appreciate all the work that's done, but I want us to we've got to have a system of assessing, not just the system that has assessments. And we've got to make sure our kids from their perspective, our teachers from their perspective, yes, are involved, but including these other areas like in the United We Learn things and from the student voice team and the other parts, somehow that has to be able to be captured in the learning experience. And I think it's really hard to do if we're not also being mindful with how they're captured in the learning assessments. And I do think that just even if it was end of course with a more richer way, we may have a way better way of having a meaningful assessment that is much more closely related to the time when a kid learned something so they can show it than just asking for 3 years later, especially if it was done in a disparate or atomistic fashion, even as well intended as it is.
Sure. Absolutely. I'll bring up something, and Jennifer may want to add to it. I think this links up, Alan, very nicely to some comments you made earlier. This discussion of local versus federal. And I think I want to kind of channel Jennifer here. So, Jennifer, you correct me if I didn't reflect you well. When you put forward the federal pieces for federal approval, the issue of comparison and comes up in a big way. So we know there is a place in which there has to be some consistency across all students with science instruction. Now, just kind of pausing there, though, part of the excitement of a local accountability is what you can do that's more timely and more competency based on the local side. So even if you have, is down the road a possibility, and again, we've got to see how the framework evolves, but is there a possibility that there's a piece of science that meets that federal standard and kids are all taking the same assessment, but maybe there is a piece of science that shows up in the portrait of a learner connection and competency pieces that show up in the local measure. So I think that you're really kind of talking, I see in this conversation of local being a place where that very connected, hands-on project base vibrancy that we've all seen with excitement and we all support with excitement, that can exist as even if you have to do something a little more structured to meet the federal piece. And again, obviously we'll see how the federal evolves over time as well. So Jennifer, did I go down, did I channel you incorrectly?
No, got me. We're on the same page. The one thing that I would also note is our portraits of a learner, they align to students and in specifically the science assessment is the knowledge, skills, and those competencies around that are so important to each district's local portrait of a learner. Those critical thinking skills, those problem solving skills that are taking these ideas. And again, I go back to those three things that you ask about, those cross-cutting concepts, the disciplinary core ideas, and those science and engineering practices, and integrating them in around phenomena that are real world. So I think that, back to your original question is integrating those and incorporating those into an assessment that has real world applications that they can critically think about, obtain information, and then make determinations on that leads to that or those competencies of a portrait of a learner.
Yeah, and I appreciate all those are very, very thoughtful responses. The practicality of this, so from a teacher's perspective, is if they're only hit with standards and they don't all maybe from the state to say, hey, here's how these standards relate to these three disciplinary ideas and core ideas, these cross-cutting concepts, and these engineering, practices, and to our portrait of a learner, so that if you do this one thing right and well, you're getting all of them, versus they unfortunately often getting, these are my standards, and like everything separately, it makes it really hard. And then I would argue it's then very practically hard for a teacher to say, well, we covered all these standards when that's in the focus of this learning target or somebody coming in, when rather we really should be talking about this integrated thing where all those are together so they can design that rich experience and do something kind of once more deeply well, so that the kids even have an engaging, vibrant learning experience out of it, right? So that we do it. And then hopefully the assessment will not also be too far afield, especially maybe it would be given in this two-component part, right? Here's the federal part and here's the local part, but we see them kind of together, and that's how they kind of get it, and also closer to when they were learning those things versus 3 years out, which is, really hard on anybody, I think. So, but thank you for those. Those are really thoughtful, reflective comments, and I appreciate all your work on those. I just bring them out because eventually it has to be a practical thing that people are able to do, right? And that's where Josh saying, do we rearrange our courses? Do I do, we've got to have this way where we can understand this so we can design this great learning and then do it not only to meet these assessment needs, but also those engagement needs on the front end that we're all committed to. But thank you so much.
Debbie, you had your hand up.
And just a quick comment, because the understanding of both aspects is important. And I think it's just really important at our local level that we scaffold that to what the federal level expectations are, is that we're building towards that final product, perhaps. So.
Thank you. Rhonda, I'll go back to one thing you said that I think is very connected, and that is we have to look at the connection between the subjects in high school science. And I will say, from spending time in the classroom, we've seen less of a change in how science instruction is taught at the high school level than we've seen at the elementary and middle school. And I think it is that barrier of course domain specific science courses. And in fact, teacher certification is linked into course domains. So I think as we refresh the design of the science assessment, getting some districts with the help of Mickey Ray's department to come in and really say, how can we see connections between subjects at the high school, might be a good first step in helping high school teachers understand this assessment better. If you're certified to teach biology, you don't necessarily have a certification to teach chemistry. So I think it is really hard challenge for our high schools. We have a couple more things about accountability we want to share. Helen, I know you're on, so if you'll take us to talking a little bit about the school report card.
Okay, good morning. Can you guys hear me okay? Good morning. I want to echo how much I have enjoyed the presentation and the rich discussion this morning. Well, it's my pleasure to share a few updates regarding the school report card and requirements to ensure compliance to meet some of the recent legislation. Jennifer mentioned about how the data has been made and presented to the district. So the 10-day regulatory data review period following public release closed on October 10th. Well, since then, OAA has been busy reviewing and responding to the request for changes for the data. If districts saw that there was some discrepancy, they were able to actually submit requests to make those changes so that the final data is more accurate and reflects what's happening in our schools. So KDE released the final data, which reflects any of those approved changes to our districts on November 12th. The final data, which the districts received on November 12th, should be used to update their landing page as outlined in House Bill 6. This is the current, House Bill 6 is the current state budget bill. And within this bill, there is language which requires schools and districts to prominently display the proficient percentages in reading and mathematics on the school and district website landing page, as well as the ranking of the schools and districts have until November 26th to complete these updates. Currently, the districts are using the data that they received in those spreadsheets. They're linked on the KDE websites to comply with House Bill 6. Now, this is temporary until the new school report card is released. KDE has a new report card vendor, Anlar, and they're working diligently to release the card publicly by the end of the calendar year. Once the school report card dashboard opens publicly, in order to meet the requirements for House Bill 6, what this means is the schools and the districts will have to update the link that they currently have on their websites to reflect their individual school and district dashboard in the school report card. Devin, you can go to the next slide. So this slide reflects the expectations of what the districts and the public will see once the report card opens. As you can see, the new school report card dashboard opens. All of the finalized data sets will be housed here. It will look very similar to what we had in the past. The plan, once the school report card is open, is to sunset the web page where the data is currently located. This is the link that all of the schools and districts are using to actually comply with House Bill 6. So that web page, once the school report card opens, will go away. We will send out notification letting you know when the report card will be open so districts will have time. So once that opens, as you can see, the dashboard will look very similar to the previous one. You'll see the dials there. It reflects the colors. The status and the change will be also seen on the report card, as well as the federal classification will be here as well. So again, we're anticipating that the school report card will be available and open as of mid-December, mid to end of year. Any questions?
Thank you, Helen. I just wanted Helen to give us that update because the school report card is something that's used all across the community to look at how schools are doing. And I just wanted you to be aware that it's not quite out yet, and it's still it's on its way. And it should look very similar. It's just a new vendor. And so they've been working to get it ready. And schools have had opportunities to give input on that. Any questions for Helen about the school report card? Well, this has been a banner meeting. We have been diligent and attentive, and I appreciate all the comments. It's been wonderful, from giving KDE information about how we might get more students in attendance, to brainstorming ideas for how to recruit and retain the best teachers, to having a very deep and content-focused discussion about science and how we merge everything we hope the United We Learn campaign will bring to our current accountability system. I thank you for your attentiveness to today's meeting. Please make sure you have March 18th down on your calendar. We'll be into what hopefully is a Kentucky spring by then. And the date I also want to mention is July 15th. It is always hard to get everyone together for summer meetings, but we're fine if your background is a beautiful mountain or a beautiful beach, wherever you're relaxing, but try to carve some time so you can tune in on the 15th. We also have September 16th and November 18th on the calendars as well. But really, we hope to have this great attendance and participation at future meetings. Thank you for your time. This is a committee that is very valuable. You've seen today our opportunity to influence and give input into many different projects. So I appreciate everything. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday with your friends and family. And we look forward to seeing this group together March 18th. Thank you.
Hey, Jana Beth, could we get a motion to end the meeting?
You're right, after my compelling speech.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Heather. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank
Chuck.
you.
Great.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you all.
Yeah. Thanks all. You did a great job.
Bye-bye,
Thank you.
you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Happy Thanksgiving.